It's the start of hurricane season, and we're here to help you navigate it from start to finish.
They are anticipating a long-term recovery of at least 10 years.
We're taking you to places still picking up from Hurricane Helene.
You can see some houses that still hadn't been completely repaired.
We'll talk about what we learned from covering Central Georgia's most impactful hurricane in decades and share how it informs our forecasting for this season.
And then it tilts, and then it rotates, and it tilts, and it rotates.
And we'll show you some of the tools used on a daily basis to track storms and why they're helpful, and sometimes not, when it comes to tracking hurricanes.
Would we get the temperature reading from this observation station?
You would if it works.
So stick with us as we help you stay weather aware. We'll be with you every step of the way through the 2025 hurricane season. Hello, and thanks for joining us. We're approaching another hurricane season here in Central Georgia, and while that normally means we'll get rain and wind from some of the outer bands of these tropical systems, last year was a little bit different. Hurricane Helene ripped through with 80+ mile-per-hour winds, slamming into our eastern counties as a high-end Category 2. As you'll notice throughout this special, it didn't discriminate, and a lot of you are still recovering. Some places it's going to take a long time to move on. That's why we're updating you ahead of the 2025 hurricane season to let you know what the forecast models are predicting this time around and how you can stay safe and weather aware. We'll take you to Telfair County, where folks share what it's like riding out the storm and recovering from the storm. We'll talk about some of the cool tools we use to track severe storms that help us help you stay safe. So stick around as we talk about a preview of the 2025 hurricane season. In 2024, NOAA meteorologists predicted an above-average season, and they were right. Last year, there were 18 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. The National Hurricane Center said there was even a record-breaking ramp-up in storm formation after a lull in what's supposed to be the peak of the season in September. Of the 11 named storms, 5 made U.S. landfall: Beryl in Texas, Francine in Louisiana, and Debbie, Milton, and Helene in Florida. Now, 3 of those names have been retired: Beryl, Milton, and Helene. This season, they've been replaced by Brianna, Holly, and Miguel. So let's take a look at the numbers before every hurricane season. Forecasts are made trying to figure out how it's actually going to go. Of course, no one can hit it exactly on the nose, but Colorado State University takes a shot at it every year. This is the average, about 14 tropical storms for a typical hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin, 7 hurricanes, and of those, 3 major hurricanes. So the numbers are out, and for yet another year, there's a forecast of an above average season. 17 tropical storms, saying 9 hurricanes, and of those, 4 would be major hurricanes. Now, this is not taking into account anything that's landfall or not landfall. This is total for the Atlantic Basin. So again, going for above average. We'll see how it goes. So when we go into the 2025 season, things to look out for, again, and we're in kind of in a world now where there are many meteorologists out there now, and they're able to follow this stuff. They hear us say GFS, Euro, Graph, high-res model, the NAM, all these models, and they go find all that stuff now. So which is cool, because back in the old days, people, you probably don't know this, they would send out, and as TV stations, they would send out hurricane plot maps. And then when we would talk about the hurricane, here's the latitude and longitude, they would plot it at home. So you could follow along and see the track of the hurricane as a kind of a fun thing to do, just to kind of keep an idea of where it was going on. Now everybody can do it on websites and all that stuff and everything on the interwebs. But anyway, when you take into account all these models, there's going to be, we're going to talk about it, fluctuation in that, but also a thing to keep in mind, just before we even get into that, is there's a difference between tornado situations and hurricane situations. Tornado situations are quick. I mean, we know that the atmosphere is there, that it's conducive for development. Hurricanes, days, sometimes a week, we can follow this stuff. So it gives a lot of time for prep, but it gives a lot of time for things to change as far as the track.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, and even beforehand, our first signs of looking for a potential hurricane reaching our neck of the woods is, of course, model consistency. I'd say a week to 2 weeks beforehand, the long-range models, they're all over the place, and you probably noticed in the show that we have the green and the blue blobs, meaning GFS and the Euro, and they're just spread apart all over the map.
Even on normal frontal passage coming through a range, that'll change all the time, yeah.
But the first thing that we notice when we are trying to get an idea of when a hurricane is coming or where it's going to be located is that model consistency. And I remember for Helene, we saw that disagreement all throughout the past week before the arrival of Helene. And then I remember the week beforehand, I was doing a shift, and I saw both the blue and the green, the GFS and the Euro, just together, showing that model agreement. And that was the first time I was like, okay, we could potentially get a hurricane here in central Georgia.
And what's weird is once that happened, and this is weird because you'll see it usually they'll spread apart again. It just, everything got on board at that point, which is also kind of rare. You'll see things kind of diverge a little bit, even up 2 days before.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think one thing to take home, especially with this past hurricane season more than others, typically we see them form off the coast of Africa, go across the entire Atlantic, so it does give you a good amount of notice, somewhere about a week, maybe a week and a half. A lot of these storms, especially Helene and Milton, formed in the Gulf or down in the Caribbean Sea, and they made a quicker path up to the mainland of the United States. So you don't have as much warning with that, but the good news is you can kind of fine tune the forecast a little bit when they are a little bit closer to you.
Now, when this thing came through, and we were looking at, it was almost kind of a blue-looking swath on the velocity mode, just these bright colors, and we knew, okay, some of these wind speeds are probably checking out. And then I remember we went to these places. Solene, I think, went to Dublin, and you start to see some of these places. And it was even more east of Dublin, though. Hazelhurst, places like that. I mean, you've been there. And to see, wow, trees just laid over all over the place by the thousand. And you saw some of that, right? So let's take a look and see what Alex saw, where the dirty side was with those biggest wind speeds.
It was a pretty sobering scene as I made my way through what's left of this pecan orchard outside of McRae Helena. Telfair County Emergency Management Director Jimmy Joins showed me some of the damage that remains and talked about what it's been like navigating the aftermath of Hurricane Helene.
You know, we were caught completely off guard, had widespread trees down, roads were impassable, but homes were affected greatly. In fact, to this day, we got a lot of houses that still have the big blue tarps on them.
It's not just the damage that is still visible. FEMA says the impacts will be felt years down the road, becoming a multi-generation problem.
They are anticipating a long-term recovery of at least 10 years.
Much of that is attributed to the economic losses from the hurricane. As of May, FEMA approved more than $549 million for community recovery in Georgia.
I think a lot of the long-term recovery is economic standpoint to the timber and, industry and their obviously pecans.
But not everyone is still cleaning up. Some farmers have already cleared debris and were able to replant crops, like this pecan farm here. In fact, the debris pickup is almost entirely complete.
As far as debris removal, we're probably at the 96, 98% completed.
It goes to show even some good comes out of the hardest times. Join says the cleanup is a testament to the people of Telfair County who came together to tackle an unprecedented challenge.
You know, everyone worked together. It was an awesome process to watch, even though we'd never done anything like this.
But as Telfair County continues to move forward, the next hurricane season waits just around the corner. Joins wants to remind folks,
identify a suitable storm shelter to ride that storm out. Heed those warnings. Have a way to receive those warnings.
And having a way to receive warnings can end up being a matter between life and death. If there's a chance you can't get us on the air, you should have a way to get wireless emergency alerts. Many counties have a code red notification system you can sign up for via text. You can also set up alerts yourself. Go to settings on your mobile phone, then go to notifications, turn on your public safety alerts and emergency alerts. You can also get notifications from apps like the National Weather Service or the 13WMAZ mobile app. Another popular device to keep you weather alert is a weather radio. You ask us all the time on the 13WMAZ Weather Network Facebook group about these devices. So here's what you need to know. Information coming through the weather radio comes from the nearest National Weather Service office. Ours is in Peachtree City. They broadcast official warnings, watches, and other hazard information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They'll interrupt with a special tone, activating local weather radios. It can be an audible and visual alarm, but you've got to be tuned to the right frequency to get it. Here's a list of the operational stations in central Georgia and their corresponding frequencies.
Know when the severe weather is going to hit, and we really try to talk to people about like a multi-layered approach on preparedness.
We'll always stream the latest weather information on 13WMAZ+. We'll bring you what you need to know as we know it, before, during, and after the storm. And every day, even when it's sunny outside, you can watch our Weather Impact extended forecast on 13WMAZ+. Stream it live at 10:30 a.m. or on demand, and watch it on your own schedule. If you're not familiar with 13 WMAZ Plus, let me explain. It's our streaming app on your TV. It's not the same as the app on your phone. If you have a smart TV, download 13 WMAZ Plus on your Roku, Apple, or Fire TV device, or get a Roku, Apple, or Fire device to plug in the back of your TV. Then start typing 13 WMAZ, download, and add the channel, and there you go. You have free access to exclusive content, including all the weather coverage you count on. Now, we've talked about how we work to track Helene and other storms, but we rely on satellite locations that use a bunch of different tools to inform our forecast. Ansley Parker went to Washington County to explain how observation stations work on a regular day and as we work to track hurricanes.
During hurricanes and severe weather situations, you've often heard our 13 WMAZ weather team saying things like, "We need feet and eyes on the ground." That's because it can be difficult to tell exactly what's going on just from being in the studio and looking at the radar. Now, that's why places like Sandersville are so important, because they're home to weather observation stations.
Just the wind sensor just gives you wind direction and wind speed.
Ray Lawrence is the airport manager for the Kalen Field Airport in Washington County. Each piece of equipment in their weather observation station is used to track weather data every single day. Things like temperature, wind speed and direction, humidity, visibility, and more. And the data from these stations fills out the weather maps that you see every day, on air, on 13 WMAZ Plus, and... If I pulled out my phone and opened the weather app, would we get the temperature reading from this observation station?
You would if it works.
If it works, because as much as these weather stations are vital for on-the-ground information, they can run into a lot of issues.
They are a little bit fickle. They're sensitive to lightning strikes and things.
Things from wasps' nests to hurricane-force winds. Washington County's observation station went offline during Hurricane Helene, and Sheriff Joel Cochran says they've only just begun their repairs around the community.
You can ride through our communities and you still can see in places some trees that are down. You can see some houses that still hadn't been completely repaired.
Lawrence told me when these stations are active, they're a vital part to understanding incoming weather as it approaches, something that would have been crucial during Hurricane Helene.
Well, you can see trends. If the weather's coming from the northwest, then we can look at airports in that direction and see the trends and see what's happening there.
So while these stations can be a vital part of our daily forecasting, they aren't always the most reliable during big weather events. It takes a whole team of tools to track and monitor systems like hurricanes.
Now, let's get to the when it was actually coming through, and I remember it was all looking around going, is that wind gust real?
Yeah.
Some of these wind gusts we were seeing, and I was doubting it. I mean, I remember we were on air, I'm like, I'm not so sure that's a real number, what this is showing. And then we saw no numbers.
Yep.
We started losing data.
Yeah, observation
side,
stations.
Yeah, went down. And so that's when you knew something's going on, because we're not getting any data out of there. So then we eventually had to go over to velocity mode and started looking like we do when a tornado situation is going on, looking at those pixels and kind of going in and asking it questions. How fast is this moving? And that's when we were seeing some numbers that were just mind-blowing, and we're like, this is real. This is what's going on.
Well, and remember how long it was? I mean, Thursday was when we started seeing subsequent bands coming up, and we had tornado warnings from that as well. And then it was all night heading into Friday morning, and then we had flash floods all morning long. It was probably one of the longest events that I've seen since we've been here.
And when I think about this storm, it reminded me going back to 2017 and 2018, Irma and then Michael. Both of those, they didn't have the same path as this, but I remember they both came in hot. I mean, both of them were like, oh, hold on a second. 'Cause Irma, was coming up through Florida and then started to curve, and we were on the dirty side of that. And then with Michael, I remember in the middle of the night thinking, this thing is still showing up as a high-end Cat 1, Cat 2 in our southern counties. So it was not the first time we had to deal with that in the past, 8-10 years or whatever. But it did remind me of kind of thinking this through, like, hold on a second, this is a game of inches now. If that track goes one way or the other, you have the haves and have-nots, and it's a quick cutoff in that game right there. So with Michael and Irma, we were having to pay close attention to really that center line that so many people now say, don't pay attention to the center line. And when we're talking about that, they're talking about the cone, right? So they're talking about, okay, so this is the cone of uncertainty. The reason they call it that, because the farther out in time we go, the more uncertain it gets. And you'll see on those tracks that center line that runs right through there, and that's generally the best guess of thinking where this is going to go. I like the center line, to be honest, and Helene proved that center line coming through does make a big difference. But the cone, I mean, you know, we go one way, we go the other way, but that may even be changing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same way we learn stuff from big weather events, right? The same way the National Hurricane Center is learning stuff too. They're trying to figure out, okay, what products work, what products don't work. And I know this year they're making a few changes. It's not going to be major, but I think they're going to trim that cone down as much as possible. They said anywhere between 3 to 5%, which could be a big kind of accuracy help there.
Yeah.
And then also they're going to add in, when you're just looking at the cone, the watches and warnings for tropical storms and hurricanes, so you don't have to flip between the two products. So when we're kind of showing you, hey, this is the area that we think are going to be impacted, it helps you can see the watches and warnings too to say, okay, we feel confident about these areas within the cone. But it's all a learning process, right? We're all kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't.
Oh yeah, and that cone is like just a big variation, because obviously the cone, how wide it goes, is how many different ways within that cone that the center of the storm can take. So obviously just one small fluctuation over to the west, that puts a lot more areas on the dirty side, or the same other way, a little fluctuation to the east puts a lot of areas to the west further on, well, I guess that would be the calmer side right there, but still, it's just kind of showing you all of the possible outcomes where that center of the storm can go, and that plays a crucial role when determining the impacts of the dirty side versus the clean side, which made all the difference, especially with Helene.
It's really interesting to me, though, to go to whatever, the 3%, 5% reduction, because yes, you could see where it could improve some accuracy. It also seems like it could be a gamble from the Hurricane Center.
That's true.
It's a bigger chance to miss because you didn't have a tighter cone. So I'm interested to see how this is going to play out this year, especially with an overlay of watches and warnings and all that. I haven't seen that, so that's going to be a learning curve for all of us this year.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
definitely.
As we're tracking a hurricane, we use Doppler radar to let you know what's going on. David Guerrero made a visit to the National Weather Service in Peachtree City to actually go inside this essential weather tracking technology. There's the radar shot.
Here's a look at the satellite and radar.
So here's a look at your satellite and radar right now.
Here's your satellite and radar picture.
The radar is probably the most important tool out of all of the tools that we have as a meteorologist to use.
When we're forecasting, radar allows us to monitor current conditions, and it helps us plan for what's coming in the short term. But when it comes to hurricanes, radar is vital to helping us track the storm's position and intensity in real time. And it's all done inside this dome that looks like a giant golf ball raised on a 100-foot tee. I went to the National Weather Service in Peachtree City to step inside the dome myself. It was turned off for our safety, but they were still able to demonstrate how the radar works. The main part of the radar is a large dish on top of a giant pedestal.
It's like 60 feet in diameter inside a dome that sort of protects all of the mechanical gear that's inside. And it just rotates, and then it tilts, and then it rotates, and it tilts, and it rotates.
And with each rotation and tilt, it shoots out waves of energy in the atmosphere, picking up important information like precipitation, wind speeds, and rotation. And we take all of that data and share it with you before and during a hurricane's arrival to help you prepare for what's coming.
In the case of Helene, when Helene came through last year, it was vital for us to see how intact the eye wall still was well inland once it made landfall. And that told us a lot about how intense that storm still was.
Radar also helps us determine which areas are under the right side or the dirty side of the storm, which generally receives the worst damage. This allows us to become more specific and effective in our communication to inform you of any incoming impacts.
Like David said, that Doppler radar is so important when we're talking about your location in relation to a hurricane. Take a look at this video from Telfair County and the difference between this side of the road and this side. That's just a little of the visual difference between the dirty and clean side of a hurricane. Here's more on why it's important to know what that means. The dirty side of a storm refers to the area of a hurricane or tropical system where you'll find the highest winds, highest storm surge, and the greatest tornado threat. Generally, it's the northeast side of the storm, or simply put, the right side of the storm. But it also depends on which direction the storm is moving. If it's traveling north, the dirty side will be more on the direct right-hand or eastern side. If the storm is traveling in a western direction, the dirty side will be more on top of it, or the northern side. So what makes it so dirty? It's all about the wind direction and a little math. For example, if a storm is moving north at 30 miles per hour and has wind speeds of 100 miles per hour, then the storm will produce winds of 130 miles per hour on the right dirty side, while on the left side, winds move in the opposite direction of the storm's movement. So they'll be slower at 70 miles per hour. It's important to remember, though, as a storm grows stronger, every side becomes dangerous. And we talk about it all the time, the dirty side, the clean side of the storm. That is a real thing. I mean,
Yeah.
you get on one side of the storm on the east side, and it's a totally different world over there. So really it was a game of inches about where that center line was going to be, which I know that, a lot of folks in the meteorological community now like, don't focus on that center line. But in this case, that center line did matter, because any jog a little bit more toward the west was going to put more of our area into the bad spot.
Yeah, it totally put us directly in half. I mean, we had a unique situation. It came right up the middle of the state, and that is our viewing area. That put our eastern counties on a nasty side, right? We saw wind gusts up to 80 plus miles an hour, and on the eastern side, we saw close to 12 inches of rain. So a lot of damage there. On the west side, maybe not quite as much. It was still gusty. We still saw winds 40 to 60 miles per hour, but the rainfall was a little bit lower. And in terms of the number of trees came down, obviously that was a big difference as well.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the center and the eye of the storm really into central Georgia. And it goes to show that we really depended on the radar, because all throughout the week, of course, we depended on the models. But once it got close enough to make landfall, we did something called nowcasting, in which we took the trends, we saw the behavior of the storm, where the eye was located, and that's where we really took our information in our short-term forecasting as the storm inched closer towards our neck of the woods.
But when we're tracking storms, coastlines close to us can be the first to see devastating impacts. Let's review what happens when people have to evacuate. Folks in Bryan, Chatham, Glenn, and McIntosh counties are all in evacuation zones. When they're asked to leave their homes, they'll make their way up towards us here in central Georgia via I-16. That's when the Georgia Department of Transportation sets their contraflow plan in action. Now, it starts in Savannah, where there are 2 paved median crossovers that let westbound traffic cross over into eastbound lanes to also move west. This doubles the amount of people that can get out. Contraflow ends near exit 39 at State Route 29 in Lawrence County. Barriers will be added to stop people from going up the wrong direction on an exit. Only 7 exits are available between Savannah and Dublin if evacuees are moving west in the eastbound lane. So if contraflow is activated, GDOT says avoid the interstate. You won't be able to travel farther than exit 39 going eastbound on I-16. You'll still see normal 2-way traffic on the rest of I-16 between Macon and exit 51 in Dublin. Thanks for sticking with us as we previewed the 2025 hurricane season and talked about how last season impacts our preparation for this year. Remember, send us photos when it's safe to do so via email, text, or the 13 WMAZ Weather Network group. You become our eyes and ears when things get messy, but always make sure to be safe and follow weather alerts in your area. Thanks for trusting us with the weather information to keep you safe and informed. Keep watching more 13 WMAZ Plus content streaming right now.